Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a special Saturday episode of the Haskin Cast podcast. For those of you who listened to last week's special episode on Mental Sauna 3 Christmas Inflections, we're going to be doing today a review of Haunted Holidays' Deadly Christmas, the first horror album in the series of my Haunted Holidays. Don't know how far it's going to go. I've got a couple albums in and really liking it so far. So I have some ideas for moving forward, but we'll just see what inspires me as we go forward. I do want to apologize for the sound of my voice. I am a little bit under the weather. I have bronchitis or consumption or some other thing. I'm pretty sure I've coughed up most of my skeleton at this point. But I did promise a Saturday episode, and the show must go on. I'm a firm believer in doing everything I can to stick to my word, at least communicate if I can. And I realize the only way I would be able to communicate would be by doing a podcast to tell you I can't do a podcast. So that didn't really seem like it was going to help. But that being said, let's start with Haunted Holidays' Deadly Christmas. Before we get into the music, I want to talk about the amazing artwork that Kelly came up with for this. I mean, she just nailed it. Blew it out of the park, actually. What I told her for the concept, I had a general idea of what the song titles were going to be and what I was going to write about. And I said, think about those ideas and think about that Portrait of Hell by Hieronymus Bosch, which is one of those things that you can just look at for 10 hours and still have no idea what's going on. And she said, cool. And then she came up with this. And I was just blown away, absolutely blown away. So very happy with that. She was working on that while I was finishing up the music. And the original concept of the album actually was going to be that there were only going to be a couple of stories that were narrated and everything else was going to be instrumental. But after I was working with the narration and I was having so much fun putting that together with the song and the voices that I came up with, which I'll get back to in a second, I decided that it didn't really work the way that I had originally planned it. And I went ahead and wrote additional narration for all the other songs and then recorded that. Had to change the music around a little bit to fit to the timing and everything. But so it was attacked completely the opposite of what I would normally do, which is I would normally write the story first and write the music around that. But the original concept didn't seem to be as good as what it could be. And so I ended up just rolling with it and changing it, and I'm really happy that I did. I think one of the first songs that I actually recorded narration on was "It Played Upon Your Deepest Fear," and when I went to do that one, I was just going to do that in a straight narration voice. And for some reason, I hit record and I'm hitting that part where I'm going to start speaking, and I just came up with this old man's voice. I don't know where it came from. I didn't plan it. It just happened, and I went with it. And then I went back and re-recorded a couple of the other songs in that voice. Originally, the concept was there's a couple of people on YouTube that are narrators of 5 scariest things kind of videos, and I really like the way that they speak, so I kind of lowered my voice a little bit, did a different inflection than I would normally speak with, and kind of went with that for the basic voice. But when it came to this song, this old man just kind of came out, and I thought, well, that's actually kind of cool, and worked on it a little bit, and then did it. So that's where it all started. And the origin of the album, of course, for you guys that listened last week, is the song Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairy, because I wanted to put that on the Mental Sauna Christmas album, but it was just too dark and didn't really work for what I was going for. And so I hung on to what I had composed, and that was kind of the idea that sparked this album. Was I had some kind of dark Christmas thing, and I thought, well, I don't really hear a lot of horror Christmas music, so maybe that's something that I could do that would be interesting and different. And since then, of course, I've heard some other things, but I think that my approach is a little bit unique, and I don't normally do narration, so that was kind of fun. And there was just a fun bunch of songs to work on, and I had a really good time doing it. So I think I'd started with Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairy, and then I came up with the concept of doing Jesu Joy of Man's Beheading, and then put those two songs together as like a continuing story, which may not be the end. We will see. But you'd think when you take the head off of something, it's done, but in the world of horror, as we've seen over and over again, it's not necessarily true. So let's start talking about the songs one on one. But that was kind of where everything started, and like I said, with Kelly's artwork, with that it's kind of got that warm Christmas tonality to it, but just in a hideous fashion with the eye and that sort of morphed creature and everything. Just absolutely brilliant. When she sent me the original concept, I was just blown away. I loved every bit of it. So let's get into Jingled Bells.
The original story of Christmas is not one you would likely have guessed. It all began centuries ago when a man named Jonathan Christ...
So each one of these songs, in and of itself, is a play on something. Whether it's, all the titles obviously are very obvious what I did with them, but then within the songs themselves, everything has a bit of a play or an inflection of something from the original story. So there is a tie-in to the original lyrics, at least the ones that I found to be the original ones, because I had to do a little digging on that. As times have changed and traditions have changed, sometimes the people sing different versions of it, and different countries have adapted it differently. So it was kind of interesting to go back and do some of the research. And Jingle Bells is just such a happy little song that you just kind of like want to ride in the sleigh and go really fast and just chase it. But I thought I want to do something that's just completely different with it, as I really did with all of the songs. And I don't really remember how I came up with the story, but I remember as I was developing it, I was kind of unconsciously putting those elements in, like how the jingle bells worked in the story and the bobtail and all that. And that was where I said, okay, that's what I need to do with all of these songs. I need to take elements of the originals and put them in there so that the story has some kind of correlation to it, and it's not just titled the same thing with no tie. So that was a lot of fun. And then the music, again, was one that was originally just an instrumental, and I had to retailor for the narration to fit, as I did with pretty much all of them. I think there was maybe one that I didn't have to do that with, and I want to say it was Silent Night. I'm not positive now. But anyway, yeah, so I worked on the story, and I had the music already, so then I re-edited the music to work with the length of the narration. And the way that I did it in this particular case, I don't normally work with markers. And markers are, in a scoring program, they are just like little flags that tell you, where something is supposed to be, like a little note that you can put in there. So I would put flags of where the lines of the narration would start and stop, because I didn't really have verse chorus type setup like you normally would. So you would normally know where to sing. But in this case, the markers really helped me keep on pace and make sure that the music was long enough or not too long enough to work with the narration. And it's the only project I've done this on. Even on the second Haunted Holidays album, I didn't need to do that. Because in that case, I recorded it the way I normally would have, which would be all the narration first, and then you write the music and you put the narration in where you're making room for it. But since I had to retrofit all the songs, the markers really help. So that's a good tool. And honestly, I mean, as a film composer, sometimes I would use those just for, to say when like a hit would come up or something that was going to be off time. But it was something I very, very rarely used, and never in my own albums. So it was kind of a fun way to do things and do something a little bit different and interesting. But anyway, that's Jingled Bells. So I'm hoping that my voice is going to last through this. I haven't really been talking all day, so it's not really warmed up. And I was kind of afraid that if I did talk all day, I would blow it out and not be able to do the podcast recording. I'm actually drizzling honey down my throat right out of the bear. So that's helping to coat it a little bit. And then I've got some peppermint tea that's helping a little bit. So that brings us to the second song on the album, Away with a Stranger. And this is one of those, rickety van, there's a bike in there for you, kid kind of concepts, except that in this case it's olden times, and it's more about the scientist that's trying to lure a child in so that he can study him physically and the inner workings, and take it a little bit too far. And that's the basic concept started from that rickety van idea, and then it just kind of developed as the song went. And I was playing with some sounds and just creating some textures, and developed that sort of ethereal voice, almost like a soul can't really speak because it doesn't have vocal cords or a voice box, but it's almost that like the soul trying to scream out, but it sounds terrified, but it sounds jovial almost at the same time, very kid-like. And so I started playing with that and developed that a little bit, and that's kind of where it all came together for the song to be created. And a couple of people have said that it's the creepiest song I've ever written. And for when you're doing an album like this, I'll take great pride in that. It was a lot of fun, and even listening to it now as I go back, I'm like, what a sad story. The way that it plays out for the soul really kind of sucks. But that is the world of horror. So that's Away with a Stranger.
Well, hello, little Steven. Would you like a balloon? There's one in the truck, just waiting for you.
It played upon your deepest fear. That's the one that started the old man voice, as I talked about earlier. That was one that just kind of flowed. Once I decided what I wanted the story to be about, this sort of kid who's almost imprisoned by his parents, and doesn't really have a clue why, doesn't really question it. He's just like, that kind of sucks, but it's part of life. And the twist in his life and how he finds out that he's been lied to and everything, and what it does to him psychologically, the whole murder of his parents, and that it really was something that, like, I've never written anything like that before. And then to sort of tie that in with the the music box and the crank toy and that sort of thing, because I when I was a kid, I had a Jack in the Box, and it had like a it was made of tin, I think, and it had like a tin handle with a plastic thing on the end, and then it plays the song, and then the clown thing pops out and whatever. And so this was kind of based on that idea. And it was just a fun song to do, and it's nice because when you work on things that have a very strict set of rules, like I have a very strict set of rules when I'm working on my Mental Sauna music, and horror is really a much more just wide open canvas. And there's really, for me, the only rules I had were in the story of just being able to tie it in. But apart from that, it was just a free palette for sounds and textures, and to really dig deep and play with things. And that was probably the most fun part of it. But so that's it, played upon your deepest fear.
One Christmas morning, so
Silent Night, Dreadful Night, I think, was the first song I had decided on that I was going to put on the album, and the first title that I twisted that way. The story was one of the last ones that I wrote because I couldn't figure out what I was going to do with it. I liked the title, but I had no direction for it, no idea. And then I came up with the idea of this little kid who was going to be the savior of this town that was being brutalized, and he was going to come out and save him. And then, of course, the training is all well and good, and it's great that in practice he can battle better than anyone, but unless you test people in the reality of a situation where the adrenaline's flowing and there's actual stakes, you don't really know how you're going to react. And I remember thinking back to elementary school, And, some kids and I would be sitting at a table talking, and the conversation would go to, we're like 7 years old, but we're tough kids. Hey, if anybody ever tried to break into my house, I'd beat them up. Or you don't know that. You might think that you're going to do that, but the fact is that you don't really know how you're going to react in an actual live situation, because there's no stakes when you're in rehearsal. It's like, a martial artist can do kata form, or can do like in-ring sparring matches or whatever, but that's a big difference from actually being out on the street and being faced with a thug or somebody who actually does pose a threat. So unless you're actually faced with a real life situation, you can hope that you'll react with that sort of foundation of your training and be able to do whatever you need to do. But until you're actually in it, you're never going to know how you're actually going to react. And so with our expected hero, that was the case with him. This is the first time that he's actually being faced with real life battle and what he does with it. And that is the story of Silent Night, Dreadful Night. I Saw Three Ships was actually inspired by a poem that I read, I want to say 7th grade, called The Cremation of Sam McGee. And there was something I always liked about the prose, the way that it rolled, the lines one after another, and just kind of caught me and stuck with me over the years. And so that kind of inspired the way that I wrote the lyrics out for this one. And it's because it's much more poetic than the rest of them. The others are more just narrated stories, but this was a little bit more like somebody reading a poem. And was just thinking about what the significance of the three ships would be. And, in the song, obviously, it's a very happy thing. But, of course, that's not going to fly on this album. So then I thought, well, what could they be and what could they be doing? And then I started thinking about the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie, and just, the ships coming in, and then it turns out they're pirates and they sort of raid the town, but with no reason, That sort of just, fun pillaging was not really what these people were here for. So I wanted to find a loftier purpose, some actual reason that they would come in and do this. And so then the story just came together actually very easily from there. I think I probably wrote the whole thing in 10 minutes. And it just was a very natural, easy process. I didn't really have to work too hard to get the format right, because it just really just rolled off the pen and fell together very nicely. So it's, when music comes together like that, or lyrics, it's a great thing, because that you're just in that zone. You've captured something and you just ride that wave and you're done, and you look it over and you go, yes, this is right, or you change one or two things here and there. But it's, when music is natural, I think that's when it's most enjoyable to listen to, because if you're trying too hard, if it sounds contrived or sounds too planned, to me it doesn't feel as good. It doesn't. You almost feel like somebody's trying to make it commercial or trying to sell it, versus here's what I felt in this moment, and that's what you're getting, which is more what this is. So anyway, I hope you like it. That's I Saw Three Ships, The Bringers of Death. So I talked earlier about Last Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairy and Jesu Joy and Man's Beheading. I really started thinking about how sad it makes me that Tchaikovsky hated the Nutcracker. He said it was the stupidest thing he ever wrote, and it always made me sad, because that song to me is like the ultimate Christmas song. it was, whenever I'd be at Hallmark shopping for my cards to send out to everybody back in the day, that song would always come on at Hallmark, and that meant, okay, now it's Christmas time. I'm here shopping for cards, and it's the Sugar Plum Fairy is playing, so we're good now. We're rolling. And it always made me sad that he didn't like that. So I started thinking about it from his perspective, and I thought, well, what would he do with it now? He might try and kill off the Sugar Plum Fairy. So a little play on words. I turned it into the Sugared Plum Fairy. Not that I was worried about copyright or anything. It just was a nice little twist I thought of. And the story of basically the Sugared Plum Fairy being an annoyance that just kind of won't go away. And people are sick of her, and they need to do something about it. And so she's out there doing a performance, and they boo her, and it just kind of really hurts. And then they come in and go, okay, now's the time. Now we're going to take charge of this. And then just to really show the depth of their hatred for her, they take her out and behead her in Jesu Joy of Man's Beheading, which, I said in the Mental Sauna Christmas podcast how much I love Jesu Joy of Man's Desiring as a Christmas song, and I really kind of downplayed it musically here, but I think that the inflections of it is what really served the purpose. But those two songs together, that was a fun combination of things to do. And again, these were Just a Joy of Man's Beheading was originally just going to be an instrumental. So to have paired it with the Last Dance of the Sugared Plum Fairy kind of worked really nicely musically. As I was listening back to them, trying to develop the story ideas, I thought, well, these two could fit together really well. So those were fun. And like I said, this may not be the end of them. We'll see what time says. Auld Lang Syne, Until Next Year. This was always planned to be the ending of the album. It's one of those that you can just it's a kumbaya. It's one of those songs that you all just put your arms around each other and you sway back and forth and sing together, and it's this nice warm. Okay, we've had our moment. Let's tie it all together, and then it's time to go home from the party. And so that was the original plan. And then I thought, it would be nice, though, to tie up the album. To have, we've got narrators. We have people that are telling these stories. Where are they just going to walk away? No, they're gonna say, that this is the last story, or thanks for listening, or they're going to do something. So I thought, well, I should put at least a couple of lines in there and have it tie together. And I just had that original sarcastic laugh at the end, which I liked, and I thought I'd play that up a little bit. I added a little bit of reverb just to the laugh. But it's kind of nice because it really has that feeling of everybody just going home, like the party's over and everybody's just kind of lumbering back to their grave or wherever they've come from, and it just seemed to move along quite nicely, and I really enjoyed that one.
And now, sadly, it's time to take the dead away for a while.
That wrapped up the album, and then the second album came out, which I'll talk about in another podcast here when I can speak a little bit better, perhaps. Maybe by next week, I'm hoping. In the meantime, I do have another podcast, my regularly scheduled podcast, coming up on Wednesday, and I'm talking to the amazingly talented Jojo Draven. Jojo is a fantastic film composer. She scored the film Patient 7, which you can see on Amazon and some other places that we'll talk about. But she also plays guitar with a band called The Set List, who here in Vegas, they've played at a couple of different venues, but the last year or so they've been over at the House of Blues at Mandalay Bay. And what they do is, like, every 3 months or so, they take a classic album and then they redo it with people that are currently or former performers of shows here in town. So they have, people from the different Cirque shows from Blue Man Group and some of the independent shows, and they just get together and they have a wonderful time. I've seen them do Slippery When Wet by Bon Jovi. I saw them do Jagged Little Pill by Alanis Morissette. And I'm not even an Alanis Morissette fan. I don't really, just never really clicked with her music. But the first one I saw them do was Jagged Little Pill. And I had such a good time watching them do that entire album. And then they do like a few other hits from that artist. Slippery When Wet was another one by Bon Jovi. Just a fantastic time. And then I saw them do Sgt. Pepper, and they had some of the cast from Love in there. They used some of those arrangements. Just a fantastic show. And then just recently they've started doing battles of two different bands, and then so they've got like different sets of singers and that battle back and forth singing songs. And a couple weeks before I interviewed JoJo, she was there performing. It was Journey versus the Police. And she did an amazing job getting the guitar tones, getting that feel. Really, really put a lot of effort into it, and that's something that I can appreciate. She could have just gone out and played the songs, but she went the extra mile, and she's such a talented player that she could switch back from one to another, and you just feel like you're in that element. I've also seen her perform with Blue Man Group. She did a tour with Chris Angel as well. Just really versatile, really good experience, but it's well-deserved because she's incredibly talented. So we talk about those things. We talk about all kinds of other stuff, and I'm really grateful that I did the interview when I did, because it was right before I got sick. So my voice doesn't sound like the closest version I'll ever get to Barry White. So thank you for listening. I hope you guys have enjoyed a little bit of insight into my first Haunted Holidays album. I'm planning on doing all of the albums that I have out, so it's going to take a little while to catch up. And of course, I'm working on new stuff in between other things. And I'm hoping to release at least 2 albums a year. One from my back catalog that I'm revising, and then one from something new. And some of the albums that I had released originally are going to be broken up into different formats, because originally what I did was I would just write enough music to fit on a CD, and then I would release it as an album with no thought to the styles of music. It was just whatever I wrote. So I could write rock and new age and jazz all on the same album, and it makes no sense whatsoever. So I've kind of revamped everything. Some of the things will probably not be on albums, because I've got some that are symphonies that are going to be revised. And, since you can release all that stuff individually now, there's no reason to tie up an album with a 60-minute CD or a 60-minute symphony on an 85-minute CD. I could just release those as individual downloads now, or I could do it as an EP, I suppose. But yeah, so it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out. But I do want to get all that old material revised, updated, modernized a little bit to the skill level I have now versus where I was when I wrote those pieces. And then on top of that, do something new every year too, because I want to grow and build my skills and release new creative things as well as revamping old creative things. And then, of course, I've got the books and stuff that I'm doing in between, and film projects, and I've been asked to collaborate on a couple projects. So there's a lot that's going on in the works. And then, of course, the podcast is going to continue. If everyone that I have on my dream list agrees to be on the show, I will have at least material for the next 2 years, if not beyond that. So I'm looking forward to it. It's a lot of fun. I love doing the show. I'm hoping that you guys are enjoying it. Leave me some feedback. Send me an email to scott@scotthaskin.com. Put some comments on if you're listening on iTunes. I think you can on Podbean as well. There's a comment spot there. Subscribe to the podcast. But most important, if you're on iTunes while you're listening, please take a couple seconds. Just go to that ratings tab. Put a star rating on it, whether you feel it deserves 1 star or 5 stars. Doesn't matter. Be honest. That's the most important thing, because if you guys don't like the show, I want to know that. But what's more important would be for me to know why you don't like the show or what you do like about the show, because that kind of encourages me as well. So feel free to leave comments or ratings, or you can email me. But the star rating would be really cool if you guys would do that. And for those who have, thank you so much, because that really helps. So anyway, I hope that you guys enjoy the rest of your weekend or week or whenever you're listening to this. And check out Wednesday's episode with JoJo Draven. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Haskin Cast podcast.